So, hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this very important topic that we're going to be discussing with Dr. Lathardus. We're talking about future proofing students, right? And we're talking about school leaders, readiness, career readiness blueprint today in particular. I'm going to quickly introduce myself and then introduce Dr. Lathardus, and then we'll take the entire flow forward. Right. So I'm Chelsea Dean. I'm the head of curriculum at TomoClub, and it's a pleasure to have Dr. Lathardus with us today. He's a pioneer in this field, and he's been just overwhelmingly. Oh, he's been vouching for equity. He's been vouching for everything that you can possibly ask for, right? He's He's also the CEO and principal consultant at Applied Academic Solutions. And at this point, he's always been an advocate for youth and education for more than 30 years and is also an author of several publications. Right. This is just a short introduction to Dr. Lathardus's long career in this particular field. And I know that he's also been a math and a science teacher. I would love if you can give a short introduction to how you've been in this field and how your journey has been so far.
Sure. I have been, well, first let me say thank you to the TomoClub and the opportunity to share. I have been an educator, better part of 33 years now, 34 years. I came into it reluctantly. I come from a family of educators, and I found my calling and have since
Don't
uh,
use the word.
and since just uh, found my way to feature or advocate for authentic learning, meaningful experiences, and provide the foundations to hopefully for students to become educated and strive for achievement. And so far, I've had some success at that.
All right. Thank you for sharing that quick brief. I know that the journey must have been extremely long and you must have had a lot of experiences on the way as well. You mentioned towards the end that you've had certain successes. I would love to hear what those successes were.
Well, in large part, they have been focused on helping students to rewrite the narrative that they understand themselves, particularly as a math and science teacher, working with students who had not had standardized test success, let's say it like that. And in many cases, in our communities, and people in general think of themselves as being math people or not math people, or math is just something that I don't do that well, kind of thing. And so what I found was addressing their understanding of themselves was key and essential to the academic achievement, right? So it doesn't make a difference if you spend time on task and you are starting with a position that you're convinced that you don't do well at this, then time on task won't make a difference. Um, uh, but helping to rewrite the narrative, helping them to understand that it's not so much that you don't do math, you can't do math. It is very likely that you've just not been taught math in a way that you can understand it. So how do we rewrite that narrative and reframe the learning environment so that meaningful engagement can happen? And then once they have an opportunity to experience success, they're more inclined to do the work necessary that will produce that success, right? I often talk about the idea of gaining the permission to push. So how is it your interaction as a teacher, as an educator with students allows them to see themselves and the possibility of their future that allows you to challenge and push towards success. And when they are secure in the relationship that you have with them, they will be comfortable or learn to be comfortable, let's say it like that, with the vulnerability of not knowing what to do next, or the vulnerability that's necessary for meaningful learning.
Right. And one thing that I'm hearing from you is that, or at least that I'm understanding right now, is that the accountability lies not just with the students, but also the educators, right? Like at the end of the day, we're saying that, okay, these students may or may not love math, right? For whatever reason. But it also becomes our responsibility, or at least as educators, our responsibility to rephrase whatever's being taught to them, right? To
Yes.
uh, to make it or at least reform what we're teaching or how we're teaching it. One interesting term that you mentioned as you were speaking was creating a meaningful experience, right? And creating meaningful engagement. What does that look like for you, right? Like one thing that you mentioned towards the end was about how having that sort of openness to failure is something that uh, helps students grow, right? Because you've already developed a safe space for them, you've developed like or enabled them to have a growth mindset. It enables them to experience better, right? I would
Yes.
love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I go back to and the people who know me know me. I tend to I think of myself as an old school scholar. Uh, um, just yesterday, I'm laughing at it because I'm working on a project, and I was digging through the crates, if you will. Those people who are involved in hip hop knows the reference I'm talking about. You know, the old DJ goes digging through the crates and pull out this old jam and uses that cut to derive. So I do often do that same thing with scholarship, and so I go back to John Dewey, right? So in what 1938, Education and Experience, he describes what is typical in education today. He describes it then as antiquated, almost 100 years ago, right? 90 years ago. And his central idea, his central argument is that and very interesting, he uses the term educative and miseducative, right? So those people who also know me know, then we talk about the miseducation of the Negro. Carter G. Woodson was written in 1933. This book by John Dewey, 1938. When I read John Dewey in 38, I'm convinced he had read Carter G. Woodson in 1933. But in that nature of the educative experience, he says that putting the student's sense of purpose, having an experience that is centered on the student's idea of, of purpose and meaning is essential to making an experience educative, right? He also goes, I think very interesting, he also talks about that when you think about what intelligence is the ability to strategize, to execute purpose. Discipline is one's commitment to that strategy to execute purpose. So John Dewey suggests that if you don't have purpose as a central part of the experience, you should not expect intelligence, nor should you expect discipline. And what are some of the core issues that we talk about in education today? Still are issues around rigor, intelligence, and student discipline. John Dewey, 90 years ago, was saying, put student sense of purpose in the midst of that, and you would expect intelligence and discipline. So when I talk about what is a meaningful experience, it is centered on this idea that students begin to have a narrative that this thing that I'm learning, this experience with Dr. Goggins, is significant to what I believe is important to my life and my commitment to my future self, right? Now, I'm not naive, particularly when we talk about the children I tend to work with and where my advocacy focuses on African American students here in the United States. I also know that there's a prevailing narrative that is often presented that would suggest that success comes not with being yourself, but being something other. That one of the challenges that we have in American education, working with those kids, as they sometimes, and I go back to Asa Hilliard, Dr. Asa Hilliard III, who says, "I never encountered a group of children that are not geniuses." We know what to do. First thing you do is treat them like humans. Second thing you do is love them. Right? If you do those two things, all other stuff tends to take care of itself. Our biggest issue in the United States, particularly, working with underserved, disadvantaged children, historically oppressed groups, is that their humanity is often diminished or ignored or discounted. That there are many teachers that believe they are doing their students a service by encouraging them not to be themselves, to take on the attitudes, the cultures, the perspectives of something else. Because of their education, the teachers and educators has often provided a distorted view of other communities. They don't even recognize or acknowledge or believe, can imagine that there's something there to use as a resource, right? Dr. Karen Mapp talks about understanding understanding parents and the home as a primary educational resource. But if I fundamentally believe that your home is inferior or deficient or dysfunctional, there's nothing good to be there, not only in the home, but the community itself, then I can't use that. I won't use that. But then we go back to then John Dewey talking about that if you're not pulling from these resources of the community, if you're not, if the student's sense of themselves is not showing up in your classroom, then at best, John Dewey's words, you're producing a slave, someone to execute the purpose of someone else. That's the challenge, right? That's at the end of the day, that's the challenge. And when I talk about creating meaningful experience, it is finding ways for students to be able to see themselves and to build a narrative in which their future, their intentions, their desires are at the core of the experience and the purpose of learning. And when they often, my experience has been, will put in the work, be willing to trust my instruction and push towards excellence. And I've been in situations where a group of students had not tested at proficient. Within 3 years, we had students were testing proficient, accelerated, and advanced.
All right, that was great to hear. I think uh, I absolutely appreciate the uh, the depth in which you've gone with explaining what meaningful experiences look like, right?
Mhm.
One thing that I'm taking back definitely again is about something that you mentioned about purpose, right? Like with the entirety of your of what you were talking about right now, we were talking about how do you build a sense of purpose for each child, right? For each individual, or even with that sense of purpose that that individual has, is it purposeful to them? Is it something that is individual to them, right? Or individualistic to them? Or is it a purpose of someone else that they have to, say, work towards, right? How do we create that sort of individuality alongside having that sense of purpose towards a certain goal that they have to set for themselves, right? And coming to this entire point where we're talking about how humanity, you mentioned, was ignored or discounted for a particular sector of children. Now, how we catering to that as school leaders, right? Like what would you say a leader needs to keep into account or keep into consideration when we're looking at children from diverse backgrounds?
So one, there's this, there's the necessity of a certain amount of humility, right? That that again in my professional context is the American experience. So I'm couching this within the American experience, but I have some colleagues in other places, and I know some of this is true there as well. But in the American experience in particular, that teacher preparation programs, when it comes to diversity, are sorely lacking, right? The vast majority of professional development or teacher preparation programs may require one diversity course, right? So there's no expectation of competency, right? So 1 3 hour or maybe 4 hour course that's a survey course is basically the basic tenet is there's other people out there that do not look like you, right? That one course is not going to help build competency. So first, as a school leader, one should first understand that they are very likely unprepared to know what the community nuances and resources that are available to them, right? So there's a certain amount of humility that's required. And then with that humility, go ask questions. As I've traveled a good chunk of the world, it has been my experience when you go to some place with humility and look for hospitality, you will find it. If you go to the community thinking that somehow or another, I'm a special American and dag nabbit, why don't you people speak English? You tend to find not so helpful, right? So there's a certain amount of humility that is required, and then once you take that humble position of wanting to learn, go out and ask and learn. What I've often encouraged principals and teachers throughout the years, particularly, is that out of your own professional integrity, that if you cannot be a competent professional educator without being culturally competent and knowing the resources that are available to you in the community from which your students come from, right? So yes, there's a certain amount of wouldn't it be nice, kumbaya, can we all get along to this? Sure, that's cute, that's nice. But professional integrity, that if I am to be a competent educator, this is required. So there's that, right? Understanding then that there are resources that will help with your achievement. I have to admit, I had a little something different in mind that we we're going to do. So this is cool. Let me say that this is cool. I was pulling this presentation together, and I was ready to do PowerPoint and all this kind of stuff. But this is so much better. But one of the things I was digging through the crates, that when you look at school achievement, particularly turnaround schools that went from poor achievement to achievement, it is always school culture improves than academics. Dr. Adam Voigt up in Cleveland State University, the Center of Urban Education, did a study a few years ago, and with Cleveland schools and some schools across Ohio, and it was clear when there was a concentration on SEL in particular, but creating a supportive, nurturing, not this kumbaya kind of thing, but where students feel respected, where the community is reflected in the halls of the school, where concerned and committed parents are welcomed in the school, all that kind of stuff. That students attendance goes up. There is a corresponding increase in reading scores, math scores, right? But it's always the school culture, then the achievement. My experience has been too many folks are looking at, quote unquote, the numbers, and they want to double down on, well, we need more instruction, we need more instruction. And it's a toxic school environment. Particularly when you're dealing with urban education writ large, when you're talking about educating Black folks in particular, in this country specifically, that not only there's a toxicity often in the amount of resources that the school has access to, but there's a toxicity to the curriculum as well. There's a toxicity to teachers' perspectives as well. Even the best intentioned teachers, if my fundamental belief is that you people are, damaged and dysfunctional and if not outright inferior, then even the best instruction, I'm going to teach you how to be a very good inferior person, right? And so there has to be there has to be a fundamental shift in terms of the focus. The primary function of education isn't reading, writing, and arithmetic. The primary function of education is human development, in which reading is a tool, arithmetic is a tool, writing is a tool towards human development. So I have to fundamentally believe in the humanity of the children that I'm engaging. And here's also a thing, that when I practice humanity, I am more likely to feel human in the process. My wellness is better in an environment in which when human development is at the core of the purpose of the experience, right? So all the stuff that we know about teacher burnout, the number of of teachers that leave the profession within 5 years. In school environments where the culture is good, that doesn't happen. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, one thing that you said was, I'm going to teach you to be a good inferior person, right? That's extremely insightful, because when you're talking about professional development as well, we know that there are gaps in professional development. We know that there are gaps in our curriculum. We know that we want to fill in those gaps, right? That awareness is there. I won't deny that for sure. Maybe not for all, but that awareness is still something that at least we're talking more about nowadays in
mhm,
different settings. But what or how do you do it, right? Like, what is the how? We know what is the uh what is happening. We know the what, but we don't know the how, right? We don't know the how of bridging that gap. You mentioned one thing about keeping humanity at the center of everything, right?
mhm,
Keeping humanity at the center of teaching, you keeping humanity at the center of learning as well. But again, how do you develop or help students build uh, that sense of purpose? And even as educators, how do you understand what purposeful education also means? If not education, uh, what do purpose-driven goals even mean, right? To say the least. And this is just coming, like, I just want to bring us back to our topic of discussion for today also, especially when we're talking about future proofing. You know, we're talking about future proofing students.
mhm,
We don't know
mhm.
the future. We don't know that there are too many uncertainties. We know that we're not sure of a lot of things, right, in totality. But as school leaders, there are a bunch of pathways that we can take to enable our students. One thing that you've already mentioned, right? Like, you've already spoken about purpose-driven learning and purpose-driven education, especially when you're talking about building, or at least having a community where you are recognized, right? Or having a community where you feel like you belong there, right?
Mhm.
Now, coming back to again the future proofing of students, I would love for you to take the lead now. If you can give us a guide towards how you look at future proofing students, especially when you're looking at it from a school leader's perspective, and uh, the future of the job market, the future of uh, just students being human uh, in this world right now.
Sure, sure. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. Well, you know, addressing, if I heard you correctly, and if I'm off, let me know. But you know, think about what are the issues that in education in particular that we're going to have to face, or that we're facing, that needs to be addressed,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I touched on it briefly, but one is that teacher recruitment and preparation, right? So building as a school leader in your building, ideally with the district, the school leaders in the district, building significant and closer relationships with the higher education and teacher prep programs of your area. Ooh, late, well, good, late 80s, no, late 90s, mid 90s, late. There was the big PK through 16 movement, right? So how do we better align the educative experience from preschool through graduating of a college? One of my professors, I can't say I contributed to her, but I heard it from her, Dr. Wright. She said, no, college starts in kindergarten, right? And here locally, we have the Summit Education Initiative, and they have this pathway to success, and they talk about the impact of scoring. I think it's a 19 or 20, I forgot which one, on the crawl, the kindergarten readiness right? Oh, I'm sorry, I put my hand up and it got it going. But scoring being kindergarten ready is connected to third grade reading. Third grade reading is connected to being able to do word problems in the sixth grade, which is connected to being able to take algebra 1 by ninth grade, which is connected to getting a 21 on the ACT, right? And so, but it all starts with the crawl, the readiness test. And basically the score of that is to know your ABCs in a couple of colors. So as all that to say that we have to do a better job in seeing education not as this thing that happens, quote unquote, in school, but something that is community based, right? I'll give you another scholar, Dr. Schuger, his book, too much schooling, not enough education. Too much schooling, not enough education. How do we go from schooling to education? And I think, and a part of that is building those connections between the district and the college prep programs, so that there is more discussion and integration and alignment between what is the practical experience and the preparation. So I think that's part of it. There's also, in terms of teacher recruitment and preparation, when you talk about those teachers, those new teachers that leave, part of it is their preparation, but part of it is, they come into the situation, they're like, you asking me to do something I wasn't hired to do, right? And with the previous district I was with, we was having this whole discussion around diversity and equity and this kind of thing. And I happened to go look at their job descriptions for the teachers. Doesn't mention equity, doesn't mention, I said, but yet we have this expectation that as a teacher, you're going to be competent and equitable in your practice, even though your job description makes no mention of it. Right? So preparation, recruitment, being clear about what it is that we want and expect teachers to do, and ensure that that's there. I would also add, and this gets into some of the technology stuff and where we are, but again, not all that different than what Julie was saying 90 years ago. That if, as a teacher, because sometimes I hear, all I want to do is teach, and they're asking me to do all this other stuff. And what they mean by teach is what I want to do, what they think their job is instruction. And oftentimes, from the central district, how do we address our issues? Teacher needs better, professional developments on instruction. Well, what I've often said, and I'll argue this to whomever. If as a teacher you think your job is instructions, and you see that as one and the same, then you're asking for the elimination of your position. I can go to Khan Academy and get world-class instruction. You're not going to explain how to do the orders of operations any better than what I can get from Khan Academy. And I can get that for free. I don't have to deal with strikes. I don't have to deal with, all that stuff. So if you think your job as a teacher is instruction, then you're asking for the elimination of your position. As a teacher, instruction is a tool, yes, but that's not your job. Your job is human development. Instruction is a tool towards human development. How do you take that information and incorporate it into the development of the human being before you? That's something that can't take place solely online. That's something that can never be replaced by the human experience. That's a teacher. That's an educator that can take information and experiences and help integrate those experiences and help students make meaning that is incorporated into their identity development that allows them to grow and move towards a sense of purpose. That's teaching. That's something that we have to do better at. Real quick. The other thing is 1983. That's when the national report, the Nation at Risk report, came out, and that fundamentally changed the social contract and the public trust of teachers in education. And it goes back, and it does go back to this idea of does it mean to be a teacher, right? Accountability is going to be a part of it. My students, having experienced me, should be better as a result of being with me. If their experience with me doesn't make a difference, then I can't justify my existence, right? That as a result of being with a teacher, an educator, a student's life should be measurably better. Now, we can talk about what is it that we're measuring, how we measure it. Some of that stuff of being better doesn't just show up on a standardized test, but I have to be able to document and be able to demonstrate the benefit of me, of being experienced with me, right? Because that's how you're going to hopefully gain public trust. I know that I've had that experience coming out of higher education. I moved back to Akron and started working at a middle school, and I had some parents like, "Doc, you treating our kids like they college students and such and such, and you're doing too much." And I kind of looked at them. I'm like, "Are you sure the argument you want to make with me is I have too high expectations for your child? Are you sure that's the argument that you want to make?" Right? But I could do that. I was comfortable doing that because of my commitment and the work that I've already put into community. So when that parent goes and asks, "You know what Doc said to me?" I'm fairly confident whoever he's talking to will be like, "Well, that's Doc. He's for real." Okay. So you got to put in that work and build that trust, and then those parents begins to trust, and then the results of now your child is doing well, your child is tested, your child is getting scholarships to the next thing. Then okay, you do what Doc tell you to do, right? So building that and being able to stand on the results and the outcomes and knowing that social contract is there. Give you the other part of that. So 1983, Nation at Risk. 2019, unfortunately, the pandemic kicked in, and so it didn't get the kind of the attention that it could have gotten. But the Aspen Institute came out with a report, From a Nation at Risk to a Nation at Hope. And in that, it lays or talking about the foundation of social emotional learning and whole child approach, that is the foundation upon which learning takes place. James Comer, one of the I don't call him honorary chairs of the committee, but one of the signatories for sure, talks about child development is academics. You cannot separate the two, right? And then there's a quote from a math teacher that that I think really kind of sums up the document very well. He says, as a math teacher, I don't teach math. I teach kids math, right? So again, he's putting the human being first. That as a teacher, even a subject teacher, mathematics, your primary job is to teach the human being, to develop the human being. Mathematics is the tool. Often, I was a math teacher and then got exposed to the formality of the language of social emotional learning. But my time as a well, at my school district it was called humanware. But my time as a social emotional learning specialist, I was, and in particular, it was, it's the math teacher, like, what does that have to do with me? I'm like, math is nothing more than responsible decision making, right? If anything, that social emotional learning is mathematics. What's the logic? What's your proof? What's the evidence? And make a good decision based upon what you know, right? I said it's all there, and it becomes the foundation upon which learning takes place. So I feel like I got on the soapbox and I apologize, but the what are some of the issues that come? It's the teacher preparation. It's the making sure that there's an alignment between what you hire a teacher to do and the expectations of that teacher in the job, and making sure that they're actually prepared, ideally, before they get there. And, it's continuous learning to do what it is that they're expected to do. What the evidence points out as effective for creating environments for learning. It's also understanding as a school leader in particular that you have to deal with, you're going to have to advocate for the social contract that you have, for the resources and for the things that people expect of quote unquote education, and how to navigate what that means and build through evidence the public trust of your engagement. That if there is no evidence of your effectiveness, then there is no evidence of your effectiveness, and then you that's problematic. Your work should be effective, period. And how do you document that? How do you celebrate that? How do you study where you can do better, make resources, make those connections into the community? Because again, education doesn't take place within four walls. Go back to Dewey again. Education isn't preparation for life. Education is life. So wherever life happens, education is. And as an educator, you are an expert and ideally a resource and a facilitator of it happening beyond the wall in the community, and the community begins to see you as a resource and hopefully trust your leadership and engagement.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing more that I would want to add, especially when you talk about math being responsible decision making. Like, I think I'm taking back like a lot of key phrases from you, Dr. Lathardus. I think some things are extremely crucial when we're talking about social emotional learning as well, right? And one of the core changes that we're looking at right now, you're talking about teaching and human development at the end of the day, but saying that teaching is human development, or at least
Mhm.
teaching needs to be on that path, right? Like it's just not about delivering instructions. And I absolutely agree with you. It also has the aspect of building relationships with the others, right? Or building relationships with your students. How do you form a safe space for the others to grow? Something that you mentioned earlier also about how can we create growth mindset in these kids? How do we see them as, or how do we see all the children as individuals who have certain goals or can create certain goals of their own with their own sense of purpose, right? Now, coming back to the point of having goals, right? Like, and coming back to like this job, the career planning and career readiness, what do
Mhm.
you think, right? What do you think can be done so that everyone has a chance to succeed, right? And particularly when we're talking about career readiness and career planning.
Education is unique in that they're really, you really have to have a sense of calling with it. Uh, uh, I got to say it like this. You're dealing with the sacred, right? My grandfather was uh, an educator back in the day, right? So this would have been in the 30s in Louisiana in the parish, and he was known as professor, and he would uh, uh, Sunday school superintendent and all this kind of stuff. And he was an advocate, right? So he had a gun put to his head. The guy pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed because he was going around teaching people how to read and write for their vote so they can vote, right? So for my grandfather, education wasn't a job; it was his calling, right? Now he had seven children. Of the seven children, four of them, am I saying it right? Four of them are in education. Of those seven children, three of them got their doctorates, my mother being one of them. And so education. So again, all that to say, education is not just quote unquote a job. If you're in it because it was the convenient thing to do, or it's a job, go away. Education is a calling. There is a sacredness to it because you are dealing with the development of a human being. And my grandfather, he put together this treatise, the duties and responsibilities of a teacher. And his last point was, you're dealing with a soul that came from God, that will return to God, and you will be held accountable. All right. So that said, there's a certain amount of being clear about your sense of your purpose, engaging and being in front of students. Then there's the community of it, right? So being involved with other like people, finding resources. There are plenty of resources that support leadership. Dr. Principal Kafele, he does a a a weekly Saturday podcast talking to school leaders regarding their development. I have plenty of resources in terms of building narratives. There are resources. Again, AC, we know what to do. It's accessing them and being aware that they're available to you, and surrounding yourself with that. And then the other thing I think in terms of helping us is when you take the time, again, take the time to document and learn the stories and do those kinds of things. Whatever my experience, again, I can speak to my experience, that when I had a student come back to me, or a parent come back and were like, Doc, what you did for my child, you know, so many years ago, or a student that remembers you, oh, I remember when you did something. That's energizing. Yeah. You don't do it for it, but it's a nice benefit. So all of that, I think those things are essential. And knowing that what you do matters, having the time to document and reflect on your learning, so you can see where it matters and how the difference that you've made, I think, is energizing. But it also helps justify your existence and be able to help uh, uh, you and the resources, get the resources that you need, because you can show, here's the difference I made.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And since we just have about 10 minutes left, this would just be the last question, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Um, how do you think we can integrate SEL into career readiness blueprints, or at least a career readiness program if we need to incorporate such programs into our schools?
Oh, for sure. So I think part of it is I'm looking at some of the things I again, I got this PowerPoint. That's great. So let me do this quick. Well, I'm gonna put this plug in here. So I'm going to take this PowerPoint that I had prepared. I'll make it available. So if I think this is on LinkedIn or whatever, you
Yes.
contact me, or I'm gonna put a link on my profile. Look me up, and you'll see this stuff. But all too often, we see SEL as a thing that we do with students. I'm sorry, not even with students. The thing that we do to students, and not a thing that we do with students, and what we do for ourselves. That, particularly with SEL, social emotional learning, it is the foundation upon which learning takes place. So that we it one of the things I do and did was to point out to teachers, this is not yet another thing to do. When it's done well, it fits right into your basic instruction and the way that you organize your classroom. Uh, I'm looking at the restorative questions. So we talk about restorative practices. You the respond to the challenging behavior. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Imagine if you are teaching a history subject and you just ask those questions. What were they thinking at the time? What what do you think happened after? What were people thinking about afterwards? Right? So you're practicing these restorative framework, but you're also integrating into the rigor of the experience. So much so that, one, you get a better understanding of the more complexity of the experience. But then when it comes time to put the restorative into practice, the students have already been asking these kind of questions, so it's not so odd to them anyway, right? The 3 signature practices. Check in. Just hey, how you doing, everybody? This check in. How you feeling today? Quick, right? And as a teacher, if I'm hearing where my students are emotionally, that gives me a better sense of, okay, how much I can push, what I need to do. Okay, let me get this thing going over here. Let me go talk to Susie and figure out if there's some other resources going on. It's just kind of thing. And, engaging strategies, and then the optimistic closing. One of my favorite optimistic closing is 3, 2, 1. 3 things that resonated with you, 2 questions that you have, 1 thing that you're going to do. 3 things that resonate. Reflective learning. Listen. 2 more questions. That tells me, as an educator, okay, so I did all this stuff and these questions, these couple, whatever these questions are that's coming back at me, tells me, okay, let me spend some more time here, or we can find some different things there. And then making that commitment, so all that. So I think the SEL practices and frameworks are not, when done well, are not yet another thing. They enhance and provide the learning. And again, it's not so much that are things that we do to students, but in our practicing it, we create an environment that helps and support our wellness as adults, as people in this environment, right? I've heard, people say, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So that doing these practices, practicing SEL, creating environment that is supportive and nurtures the human being helps the educator in the environment as well. How are we modeling and practicing these things?
Absolutely, I completely agree, especially when you talk about how these really, really simple practices within the classroom. I think one of the best ones that I like, especially for engagement, are think pair shares, right? And
Say it again.
think pair shares, right? Like
Uh-huh.
where you think you pair up with someone and you share it. This is
Yes, yes. Okay, I got you.
yes, yes, right? And there's supposed to be such simple activities just to engage your students immediately and just to get them going, get their attention, get them to speak to each other, or
Mhm.
doing any sort of mind maps. Any of these tools that we're using, at the end of the day, they are still tools. So even the ones that you mentioned, the check-ins, uh, the optimistic closing, all of these tools, if they're used in an effective way, or if they're used in a form where there is structure in the classroom, where that, as you had mentioned earlier, discipline is absolutely the core need of success,
Mhm.
right? So even when you're talking about discipline, how do you create that discipline? It's when you start creating a structure and you want to start living by that structure even in your classroom, and it is intentional and conscious uh,
Yes.
at the end of the day. So absolutely agreed with you when you're talking about, you know, the overarching theme of today, when we're talking about career readiness in itself, we're talking about purposeful education. We're talking about
Yes.
meaningful experiences. We've also spoken about how teacher recruitment and preparation is extremely important and is honestly the core of building the kind of community that you would want to build, right,
Mhm.
for human development. Like all of these core terms that you've used today have been extremely helpful, especially from the perspective of having our students grow up into a society which helps them feel welcome, and where they're able to welcome others, right? At the end
Mhm.
of the day, no matter the subject that they're learning, no matter the tool that they have an expertise over, there is still a community that they can go back to, right? It is still a community where they're able to interact with each other in a peaceful manner, where there's kindness without asking for kindness. Uh, and this is something that we also try to do at TomoClub, right? Like just to bring everything back. Even when we're talking about career readiness, we're thinking about, okay, we prepared them for the job market. And it's sad that we keep saying job market, right? Like as if we're all resources that need to be sold. But at the end of the day, uh, we do need to think about what kind of jobs we want to take, right? Like what is our calling, as you had mentioned. For your grandfather, the calling was that of becoming a teacher, for teaching for a greater good, right? For something beyond himself.
Mhm.
And how do you find that purpose for yourself? That is something that we're also trying to build, and we're trying to think about how do you incorporate that in each student's lives, right? Not just the students, but even the teachers by themselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. So I would love if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with all of us, and I'll leave the floor open for questions.
Well, I always got, I always got thoughts. Uh, but I will, at the risk of, I feel like I might have been on the soapbox a couple of different times, and it's something that's a passion for me. So, sorry, not sorry, but uh, the we have to find ways to find for meaningful engagement, both in terms of the students and the teachers. Uh, 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 Ways in which I think, in terms of future proof, the more that we center on the human being, the more that we focus on the human interaction and the significance to the human, the more you're protected, or the more likely that you can that your position and your presence is necessary. The more that you focus on just instruction, you're asking for the elimination of your position, right? That's where the meaning comes in the relationship, and not in the again, I keep on going back to this kumbaya. There's a very practical side to this. Even when Dr. Hilliard's quote, first thing you do is treat them like humans, the second thing you do is love. I remember doing a workshop, and it was like, what does love look like in the context of your classroom, and humor? I'm like, no, very practical. Maybe you heard of this. Love is kind. Love is not rude. Love does not rival in evil. Love, so what is your practice for not being rude? How do you practice being kind in your classroom? How do you hope? What's your policy and practice for hope in your classroom? This can be very practical in its application that will then manifest in academic rigor and meaningful learning that cannot be simply done through instruction, right? So all of that, I think is important. So if there's anybody who has questions or would like to add a comment, I'm open for that, and we encourage you to do that. So yeah.
Right, we'll wait for a couple of minutes and yeah, speak gratitude here.
Yes, Daniel, I appreciate you.
Right. All right. Yeah.
Mr. Waits, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I just wanted to say thanks a lot for this. This was really helpful, and as always, I learned a lot. So thanks.
Yes, peace.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Lathardus Goggins, for being here and being so very insightful, and for giving us that sort of insight that we will be able to take back. And as we're delivering our curriculum as well, we're going to keep these things in mind for sure. And as Sid has mentioned in the comments in the chat, that math is responsible decision making was indeed a gold medal. Like, it deserves a gold medal for sure. Right? We're just getting out of the Olympics high, and this is definitely something that we needed. And I don't think this is something that comes very naturally. It is absolutely your calling, and we're glad to have you here with us.
If I can be a resource, please. More than happy, and of course, am excited by the work that the TomoClub is doing, and seeing what is going on there. I've been learning more and more about it, and it's really good work. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that. And I think we will be looking forward, and I hope we will be looking forward to your presentation on your LinkedIn profile.
Yes.
I know we did drift away from our topic of discussion, but nonetheless, very important conversations here. Also aligned with what meaningful education means for us. And again, even when we're talking about career readiness, this is not very far from it, right?
Yeah.
We know that this, if you can treat children and you can treat everyone as humans and build that love for everyone, we are already future-proofing them, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much once again, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.